Namaskar learners, I am Vikas Kumar Verma from Department of History, Ramjas College, University of Delhi. Today we are going to discuss a very important aspect of ancient India. We are going to discuss about the India's contact with Sri Lanka. There are two important events which led to the development of our relationship that has sustained for centuries. The first one is Buddhism, and second, which happened much later on, that was the campaigns led by the power like Chola dynasty in South India. So today we are going to discuss about these two important aspects of our past, which strengthen the relationship between India and Sri Lanka for centuries. We find that India and Sri Lanka, which has been referred to as Ceylon in early text, and Elam too. These two regions have been connected through maritime networks since ancient period, and this has helped in the commercial as well as cultural interaction between the two lands. Buddhism, first we are going to talk about Buddhism in Sri Lanka. So we find that Buddhism was introduced in Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BCE, and since then it has remained as the most significant faith of the Sinhalese. The religion, however, we find passed through different phases of its journey, and it has seen many changes through its course of development. To study about Buddhism in Sri Lanka, we have different kind of sources. Archaeological sources are available in the form of excavated remains, which include ceramics, pottery, coins, beads, etc. Excavation conducted at archaeological sites such as Anuradhapura, Ponaparippu, Kantarodai, and Ivan Katuba have brought to light the potsherds, which are very much similar to the Iron Age and early historical potteries discovered in South India, such as megalithic black and red ware pottery, then Mediterranean related ware potteries. So on the basis of this, on the basis of the similarities between these two type of ceramics or the ceramics found at these sites, we can trace the relationship, we can trace the contact. Further, a number of metal objects, glass objects, beads, etc. from the sites mentioned earlier, they also show the contact between the Mediterranean region and Sri Lanka, in which we find the South India acted as a mid station. In the context of numismatic evidence, we find the discovery of Roman coins from sites such as Mahagama, Ruhuna, and Anuradhapura that also indicate maritime contact between Sri Lanka and India, especially the southern region during the early historic period. One of the most notable finding in the context of numismatic finds, there are copper plaques with depiction of goddess Lakshmi, which are datable to the early historic period, and they are found at sites like Kantarodai, Mantai, Vallipuram, Anaikodai, Punkari, and many other sites. So these are dated to circa 2nd to 1st centuries BC. So in this evidence, we can relate this development to Ashoka's period, when Ashoka's in the 3rd century CE sent Buddhist missionaries to Sri Lanka, and we find that this further helped the Indian art reach Sri Lanka, and so we find that in the form of Lakshmi plaques. Further, we find that the legend which were inscribed in the Nagari characters and along with the depiction of Lakshmi, they also are found which belong to the later period, and Ruhuna excavation has exposed that, brought that to light. So on the basis of this, again we can trace the contact since the early historic period even to the latest time. Later times also both the regions were in contact. As we mentioned earlier, the remains of ceramics, beads, coins from different sites that indicates about the extent of exchange between the two regions. Now epigraphic evidence, we find as we just mentioned that some of the Nagari character in the evidence, they are found that belong to later period. In India, we find that Ashokan pillars and rock edicts, which are datable to the 3rd century CE, They also provide important information about the spread of Buddhist tradition in different parts of the subcontinent. And Buddhist tradition reached Sri Lanka only in the 3rd century BC, as we have seen, when Ashoka sent missionaries to Ceylon. Of the literary sources, the most important are the Ceylonese chronicles, which are in Pali language, namely the Deepvamsh and Mahavamsh. Deepvamsha was composed during circa 3rd to 4th century CE, and Mahavamsh that was composed during circa 5th to 6th century CE. These texts mention about the missionaries sent by the Mauryan king Ashoka, and along with that missionaries, his son Mahinda and daughter Sangmitra also went to Sri Lanka. Now, these missionaries carried the royal gift from Ashoka to the Ceylonese ruler named Devanampiya Tissa, that was in 3rd century BC, who was contemporary of Ashoka. So, this is Devanampiya Tissa is regarded as one of the earliest kings of Sri Lanka, with his capital as Anuradhapura. This literary source also mentioned about the planting of sacred Bodhi tree at Anuradhapura, which was sent as a gift by Ashoka, then construction of a Mahavihara and a stupa at Anuradhapura. Devanampiya Tissa himself became a great patron of Buddhism and established several monasteries such as Isru Muni Vihara at Anuradhapura, Vesagiri Vihara at Anuradhapura, Pathamaka Chaitya at Anuradhapura. So, we find that Buddhism had already established its importance in the land. But Buddhism to Sri Lanka was not only promoted through diplomatic and religious missions, but there was maritime trade activity which also carried the faith to Ceylon. In this context, a very important information comes from the Phu Kyokyu of Fahian, who wrote this in 5th century CE. While he was returning from India to China via Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, he noticed many Buddhist establishments in Sri Lanka, and he along with he was a Buddhist monk, and he along with the traders traveled in the same vessel which sailed from Tamlipta or Tamluk on the Bengal coast. So, the Chinese travelers also mentions about the presence of thousands of monks and existence of Biharas and Chaityas in Ceylon during this period. So, we find another important text called the Jatakas. They provide significant information about Buddhism, and here I would like to mention about one particular Jataka which mentions about travelers taking a voyage to Ceylon. Jatakas are basically the texts which are associated with the previous life of Buddha. They are stories which are associated with the previous life of Buddha, and they contain certain messages, and which helps us to understand the Buddhist faith. So, Jatakas, as I mentioned, there is one Jataka called Valhassa Jataka, and Valhassa Jataka mentioned about this is also a very important text for Sinhalese Buddhist. Now, this mentions about the voyage of merchant, 500 merchants visiting Ceylon, and they are trapped in a city which is inhabited by she goblins. So, that is the goblin city. Now, as a practice, this goblins entice these travelers, the traders, to their own town, and later on the chief merchant sensed that all these travelers will be eaten up or killed by the goblins. So, he along with 250 of them tries to flee the city in the fear of goblins. At this juncture, there is a Bodhisattva who comes in the form of white horse from the Himalayas to Ceylon and carried them back to their own country. So, this shows that this is about, this Jataka story is about the rescue of the merchants by the Bodhisattva, which indicate about the popularity of faith in Ceylon and its significance. Now, these Jataka stories are also popular in other countries, Sri Lanka, besides Sri Lanka, that is Tibet, China, Japan, Vietnam and Indonesia. We also find the depiction of Jataka stories in the form of bas relief of several Buddhist monuments across the countries. So, these two texts, one Ceylonese chronicles, Mahavamsa and Deepvamsa, and the Jatakas, they are very important texts, important literary source for understanding the development of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Now, in next part of this discussion, we will see that how under different period or under the reign of different Ceylonese kings, Buddhism developed in Sri Lanka. Now we will discuss about the development of Buddhism in Sri Lanka under the reign of different rulers after Devanampiya Tissa. So Devanampiya Tissa was succeeded by his brother Uttiya, who also supported Buddhism and built Buddhist monuments. But he had a very short reign of 10 years. After his death, we find that Ceylon witnessed the political domination of Tamils from South India. There was a ruler called Duttagamani, and he again restored the lost glory of the Senalis, and revival of Buddhism happened during this period. He became the ruler after defeating and killing the Tamil leader Elara. So the Tamils who had come under the leadership of Elara, they were later defeated by the ruler Duttagamani, and again the Buddhism was revived in Sri Lanka. Now we find that the next important ruler is Shraddha Tissa, who is the brother of Duttagamani and who ruled also for a very short reign of 8 years. He was also a great patron of Buddhism. During the subsequent period, we find Buddhism remained as the prime religion of the country, that is Simhalis. The bhikkhus, the bhikkhunis, they flourished in Sri Lanka, and we also find instances of the lay follower, that is Upasak. They even frequently visited Bodh Gaya in India to worship the sacred Bodhi tree. So, Shraddha Tissa's successors included Tulathattana, Lanja Tissa, Khalatta Naga and Vattagamani Abhaya. Of these, Vattagamani Abhaya is the most popular, and during his reign we find, that is in 1st century BCE, there was a war against him by the army led by Tamil chiefs. The Tamil chiefs defeated Vattagamani and established their political domination for the next 14 years. The period of Tamil domination affected the state of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, and during the same period there was a famine and that led to the economic crisis, food scarcity, and which led to the death of thousands of Buddhist monks. During the same period, we find the division of Buddhism into different sects in Sri Lanka, and that was because Vattagamani Abhaya built a monastery called the Abhayagiri Vihara and made Mahatissa, his full name was Kuppakala Mahatissa, as the guardian of the monastery. But later, Mahatissa was expelled from the Mahavihara for his misconduct, but his followers supported him, disciples, they resented this punishment because they believed that their teacher is right. As a result, they moved away from the Mahavihara with 500 monks and they formed a different sect. So this was the starting point of the division of Buddhism in Sri Lanka into different sects. One who favored the monks at Mahavihara and another who favored the monks at the Abhayagiri Vihara. One who were the followers of Mahatissa and other who were opposed to him. Throughout the ancient period, we find the interaction with India that was continuing, and as a result we find different doctrines of Buddhism that went to Sri Lanka. The doctrines like Vaitulyavad, which is sometimes identified with Mahayana, that went there in 3rd century CE. Similarly, there is Vajrayavad. Vajrayavad is identified with Vajrayanist, that is the Tantric Buddhism, which was in around 9th century CE. So we also find that the early centuries witnessed the compilation of Pali commentaries and chronicles, as we have seen Deepvams and Mahabams. There was a ruler called Mahasen I, who was the first Simhalis ruler to embrace Mahayana Buddhism, and he built the famous Jetwana Bihar at Anuradhapura. Now, due to political instability also, the Buddhism faced a very downward trend in Sri Lanka for some time. That was the period from circa 5th century CE up to circa 11th century CE was not very favorable for the growth of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, because there were rivalries between the kings leading to political instability. Due to this constant engagement in warfare, the sufficient attention was not paid to the religion and monasteries were therefore neglected. Even the wealth accumulated by the monasteries was used in the wars, and the royal treasury was emptied. But we find that even during this period of crisis, some texts were compiled and the faith survived. From the 11th century CE onwards, we find there were several invasions of Sri Lanka by the Cholas and the Pandyas, and which further resulted in the destruction of the monasteries and acquisition of the monastic wealth. This crisis was that ended, or we can say that revival of Buddhism that happened under the king Vijayabahu in 11th century CE. Vijayabahu defeated the Cholas in 1070 CE. His main contribution included restoring the monasteries which were earlier destroyed by the invaders, and also building the new ones. The religious revival was accompanied by the intellectual reawakening and writing of several Buddhist works in Pali and Sanskrit. His death, however, affected these activities, which were later revived under the ruler, the king named Prakrambahu. Prakrambahu first. He suppressed many rebellions. Now, Prakrambahu was a great ruler who ascended the throne after subduing his rivalries who were vying for power. He rebuilt the city of Anuradhapura, which was destroyed by the invaders and which was neglected and abandoned after its devastation by the Cholas for about more than a century. Buddhist monuments at this place at Anuradhapura, they were restored. The king also convened a council of the leading monks of different schools, that was in order to initiate a discussion and for the purification and unification of Sangha. Now, there were great scholars during that period like Sariputta. Sariputta was a great scholar who had command over Sanskrit as well as Simhalis. After Prakrambahu, we find there was a war of succession, which again led to the decline of due to which Buddhism suffered in Sri Lanka. Several successors ruled for very short period until the accession of Prakrambahu II. He invited monks from the Chola Empire in South India and established several monasteries and centers of Buddhist learning. His immediate successors, Vijayabahu IV and Prakrambahu III, also patronized Buddhism. Now, this political stability was maintained by Prakrambahu II and his successors until the arrival of Portuguese in Sri Lanka in 1505 CE. So, now we will see a different phase when these European powers come to Sri Lanka and see how it impacted the development of Buddhism. So, after their arrival in Sri Lanka in 1505, the Portuguese gradually strengthened their base by building a fort in Colombo and establishing many trade settlements. Gradually, they acquired control over coastal region and which remained in their possession up to 1658. They persecuted Buddhism and they were more interested in propagating Christianity through building missionary schools. The Buddhist missionaries and institutions, they suffered a setback. They were destroyed and set on fire. Portuguese rule thus marks one of the darkest phase of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. The next important phase after the Portuguese, that was when they were defeated by the Dutch in 1658 with the help of the Ceylonese king. Now, the Dutch also, there was an agreement signed between the Dutch king and the Ceylonese king, because the Ceylonese king wanted the Portuguese to be defeated. So, he helped Dutch in defeating the Portuguese. But once they came to power, we find that in 1612, a treaty was signed between the Dutch king and Senate, and in 1638, his son and successor Raj Simha sought Dutch assistance against the Portuguese in accordance with the alliance. This marked the beginning of the rivalry between Dutch and Portuguese in Sri Lanka, which continued up to 1658, when the Portuguese were finally expelled, as we have just seen. Now, the Dutch possession, however, lasted only up to 1796, and this was followed by the British possession of Sri Lanka. Now, the Dutch, however, in contrast to Portuguese, they were Protestant Christians. Therefore, when the Dutch employed Simhalis Protestant agents for the propagation of their religion, the latter were officially Christians but Buddhist at core. In other words, I should say, the Dutch who employed the Simhalis agents for the propagation of Christianity. So, there were many converts So Sinhalese also converted to Christianity, but what I am trying to say, that because they were Protestant, so they did not mind them keeping their own faith within themselves. That is to say that officially they were Christians, but they were Buddhist at core. So the propagation of the religion did not affect Buddhism so much. Dutch were more concerned with the extension of commerce, and several Sinhalese kings like Dharma Surya II, Sri Veera Prakrama, Narendra Simha, then Sri Vijaya Rajasimha, and other kings, they made attempts to again revive Buddhism by constructing monuments, encouraging Buddhist pilgrimages, organizing religious festivals, and promoting the compilation of literary works. So this was during the occupation of the Dutch. Now next important phase, that is the arrival of the British in Sri Lanka and the end of the Sinhalese rule. So arrival of British, that really was an attack on Buddhism, and Buddhism declined in Sri Lanka during the British rule completely. During this period we find that British attitude towards Buddhism was not very favorable because they promoted Christianity. Buddhists did not enjoy the privileges as granted to the followers of Christian faith. The Christians were given more privileges. Next, we find that favorable position were given in the government or in the jobs, that was given to the Christians, which resulted in the conversion in a very large number of Buddhists, because they would get a job in the government. So therefore there was large scale conversion from Buddhism to Christianity. Christian missionary activities also increased in Sri Lanka, and this led to the establishment of missionary schools and other institutions in Sri Lanka that received support from the British government. Schools had their own church, and Christianity was held as a religion of civilized people. This affected the temple schools, village schools, providing traditional education. So the spread of Christianity in Sri Lanka led to the decline of Buddhism during the British rule. The revival of Buddhism only later happened in the 20th century, that is in post-independent era, when Sri Lanka became independent from the colonial rule in 1948, and the re-awakening was reflected in the celebration of Buddha Jayanti in 1956. So since then, again in the 20th century, we find that Buddhism again was revived by the state, and now it remains as a very important faith in Sri Lanka among the Sinhalese. Now the next important segment of our discussion today is the Chola's conquest of Sri Lanka, and this begins in the early 11th century. So let us start with the rulers. As we have seen, I will briefly try to mention about the early contacts and linking that with the Chola's conquest. So we have already seen that how Mahavamsh and Deepvamsh, they discuss about the Chola's contact, the Sangam of Cholas, because Chola, the imperial Cholas, considered themselves, or they trace their origin from the Sangamech Cholas. So Sangamech Cholas, we have already seen that they had contact with Ceylon in early historic period, and we have also seen that how the Tamil chiefs, they came under the leadership of Elara in the middle of the 2nd century BCE. They came to Ceylon and defeated the Ceylonese ruler, and which was later revived by in the later period. So now coming to, so Ceylon and the South India or Tamil region was connected since ancient period. Now we will see that how Chola, the imperial Chola, and from around 10th century, the beginning of the 10th century CE, how they made or they carried out campaigns or expeditions in Sri Lanka. So the first important Chola ruler is Prantak I. The Prantaka I or Prantak I is he led significant campaigns against Sri Lanka. He was the son of Aditya Chola, and who ascended the throne in 907 CE. The epigraphic record describe that he defeated the combined forces of the Pandyas and Ceylonese king in the battle of Vellore. In the last year of his reign, Prantaka I invaded Ceylon, but was not very successful in his objective of subduing the Ceylonese rule. Next important king is Rajaraja I, whose reign is from 985 to 1014 CE. Rajaraja conquered Elam. In his inscription, he mentioned, inscription and contemporary text, Ceylon is mentioned as Elam. So he conquered Elam in 993 CE when it was ruled by the Ceylonese king called Mahinda V. In 1014, he made grants. The Rajaraja first made grants of several villages in Ceylon for various purposes for the celebrated temple built at Tanjavur. We know that he has built the great temple at Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu, Tamil region, and so to maintain that, he made grants from Ceylon for the maintenance of the temple. Furthermore, we find the Trivalangadu inscription provide a detailed description of his naval expedition. Now, Mahinda, and as a result of that, Mahinda took refuge in the hilly regions of southeastern part of Ceylon called Rohana, and Rajaraja acquired the control over the northern Ceylon. So now, northern Ceylon becomes the province of the Chola Empire. The capital city Anuradhapura was destroyed and Polonnaruwa became the capital under the Cholas. While the earlier Chola invaders aimed only at the overlordship, Rajaraja established his mastery on the whole island. He also issued inscription in Ceylon and built a Shiva temple at Polonnaruwa. Later, the Simhali sovereignty was restored under Vijayabahu I. Next great Chola ruler was Rajendra I, and his reign was from 1012 to 1044 CE. He was Rajaraja's son and successor. He invaded the island of Ceylon in 1017 CE as mentioned in his inscription. According to the Karandai plates, he defeated the Ceylonese king and captured his territories. The whole of the island became a Chola province. He constructed several Vishnu and Shiva temples at and around Polonnaruwa during this period. Later, the Simhalis king Vijayabahu was again able to restore the Sinhalese rule. The next important Chola king was Rajadhiraja, whose reign was from 1044 to 1052, not very long reign, but we find that his inscription mentioned about his invasion of Ceylon and killing of the Sinhalese king. The campaign seems to have taken place in the lifetime of his father Rajendra Chola, and this continued during the reign of Rajadhiraja. Even Rajadhiraja's brother Rajendra II also took part in the war and suppressed the Ceylonese forces. Beside the Chola inscription in Sri Lanka, the Indian coins discovered in Ceylon, which include those issued by Rajadhiraja and Rajendra, also provide information about the Chola's campaign. Other Chola kings who also are associated with the campaign in Sri Lanka, they are Veer Rajendra and then Kulothunga first. Veer Rajendra's reign is circa 1062-63 to 1069 CE, again a very short reign. Now, during his period, we find the Sri Lankan, during Veer Rajendra, Sinhalese prince Vijayabahu freed Rohan. He was not a very strong ruler, so we find that during his period, the Sri Lankan king Vijayabahu, he freed Rohana, which was earlier captured by the Cholas in 1058. So that was freed. He established his control there, the Ceylonese king. So Chola thereafter were confined only to the northern part. We have seen that during Rajendra and earlier kings, the great part of the island, that was a province of the Cholas. But now we find the Cholas were confined to the northern part only. The Chola king Veer Rajendra was drawn to Ceylon as the Ceylonese ruler Vijayabahu made effort to free Rohana. As I have just mentioned, that because he was trying to free Rohana from the Cholas' control, so therefore Veer Rajendra wanted to defeat him. However, we find that he was able to achieve his objectives only in a limited sense, because but that was not permanent, or that was a very short-lived victory. Now, next important ruler is Kulothunga first, the Chola ruler, and his reign is from 1070 to 1122. We find that after the accession of Kulothunga to the Chola throne in 1070 CE, Vijayabahu succeeded in defeating the Cholas and restoring the independence of Ceylon. After expulsion of Cholas from the northern half of the island, Vijayabahu proclaimed himself as the ruler of the whole Ceylon and restored Buddhism. Although Kulothonga made attempts to regain the control but met with failure. He had to make peace with Vijayabahu, and according to the sources, the Chola king even married one of his daughters to the Sinhalese prince. And now Ceylon was completely, that was lost from the control of the Cholas. So we have seen briefly that how Cholas invaded under the reign of different rulers. Chola invaded the island, and how again the Buddhism at last during Kulothonga period, Buddhism was revived and Sri Lanka was freed from Chola's control. Nevertheless, Chola's influence in Sri Lanka can be also observed from many sources. So Cholas acquired the control of Sri Lanka, as we have seen, in 1017 CE, and which remained as a part of the Chola Empire till 1070 CE, that is till the accession of Kulothonga Chola. Kulothonga Chola, we have seen that he was not able to achieve his objective, and finally the island was lost to the Sinhalese rulers. But we find that the campaigns of Cholas also led to many developments in the island. During their rule, we find several administrative measures of the Chola political system were introduced in Sri Lanka. Like we have seen that major part of the island constituted an administrative division of the Chola Empire, except the southwestern part called Rohana, which was we have seen that which was freed later on by the Sinhalese ruler. This also furthered the trade and cultural contact between India and Sri Lanka. So this was not merely the political relationship or a political campaign for acquisition of territories, but we also see that this also led to the development of trade and cultural contacts between the two countries. The Chola rulers like Rajaraja built Vishnu and Shiva temple in Ceylon. So this paved the way for the spread of Hinduism in Sri Lanka also. Now the invasion of Sri Lanka, however, the campaigns led by the kings, the mighty Chola rulers, we find led to the destruction of Buddhist monasteries, and that were certainly the setback to Buddhism, which was later restored by the Sinhalese rulers. Now here are the references. One can refer to these works for understanding it in detail and in a better way, the relationship between ancient India and Sri Lanka in the context of development of Buddhism, as well as the campaigns of the Cholas. And we also have some exercises, some questions in this exercise, which help us to again revisit the topic which we have covered and again understand it better. Thank you very much.